Good evening. This evening, the Osseo Area School Board has gathered together to interview 4 candidates for the position of superintendent. This is the first round of interviews. And tonight I would like to recognize the participants here. So beginning with myself, Mike Ostafi, board chair. To my left.
Tanya Simons, board member.
Jessica Craig, school board member.
Jackie Mosqueda Jones, school board member.
Heather Douglas, school board member.
And Kelsey Dawson Walton is currently stuck on a plane. She will be here later this evening, and these 2 interviews are being videotaped for everybody, and she will be able to review those interviews after she lands, or this evening or tomorrow morning. With that, let's get started with our first candidate.
Thank you for coming.
Good evening. Your first candidate is Mr. Corey McIntyre, and he's currently the Associate Superintendent in the Anoka-Hennepin School District.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming, Mr. McIntyre. Just wanted to lay out the ground rules. We have 14 questions. I believe they're in front of you. We have 45 minutes. I'll try to keep time and keep us on track. But with that, do you have any questions?
No.
Okay.
To get started. Excited to be here.
All right, very good. And thank you for coming. I do appreciate that. Question number 1, please describe your professional experience and training and how it has prepared you for this position. Tell us specifically why you are interested in being the superintendent for Osseo area schools.
Well, first, thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. I know everyone's very busy. There's a lot going on. The weather's not been a great partner this last few days. So thanks for the opportunity to spend some time and get to know you better and get a better sense for what the work is in Osseo. So my experience, I guess I kind of want to start with a story. I was reflecting back on the hard work my own parents and the sacrifices they made for me and my family growing up, and how they always try to position us to be successful in opportunities in education. And it resonated with me the other day. We were meeting with some 19 to 20-year-old students at one of our technical high schools. And this was a group of students that had overcome a lot. They were new to the country, and all of a sudden they're taking many credits, and they've just beat the odds, right? And it reminded me on why we do this work. And so when I was reflecting back on my own experiences in my own childhood, all the way up to just this week, watching students successfully leave our system in education and move on to do the things they want to do, right? And my road, my experience along the way, I've had the opportunity to work in a number of districts, small, medium, and large systems, and that's been a rich experience for me professionally in 3 states. So I've had the chance to experience different things along the way. And my career started early in the state of Washington as a school psychologist, but I quickly moved into administration. And one of my first years as an administrator was how to pass a referendum for a new high school. And how do you get that done successfully, right? Our family moved back to the Midwest and landed in Rochester, Minnesota, and the first thing we dealt with was opening a new elementary school and doing boundary changes and dealing with expanding and changing enrollment and student body there, and then had to follow that up with, at the same time we're opening and expanding facilities with 2 high schools, make budget cuts. Rich experience there. Those are big chunks of work that really require engagement with the community and the staff and families. And you have to be successful at engaging and communicating on the needs of the community. And then from there I was fortunate enough, I took a position in Hudson, Wisconsin, totally different experience right at the time where collective bargaining went away. And a very fast crash course on how do you support with the teacher union, support the staff when everything they had bargained in their contracts went away, right? Other than just some real basic things. So how do you support staff and families through a major change in that regard? was fortunate enough then to move into North St. Paul, Maplewood, Oakdale schools, and looked at a number of referendum and facility needs there as well, and ending up having to really engage our community in a tough process around budget reductions there as well. And really redesigning how we provide supports and services to students. And again, I just keep coming back to, you can't do that without working with each entity in the community and in the district, because most of the districts I've landed in have multiple communities and have different identities and different needs. Most recently in Anoka-Hennepin as Associate Superintendent in a couple different roles there. Similar story, 13 municipalities there. How do you bring those 13 into a one district mentality and accomplish some pretty big things? We recently just passed the largest referendum in state history. We're in the middle of changing boundaries on 20 schools. Those are pretty monumental tasks. I helped redesign a $100 million special education budget. That doesn't happen alone. That requires teamwork and a lot of partnering and a lot of engagement with community and parents and staff clearly, but and students as well. Student voice is just so critical. So, I look back at this question, it's a big one just to start us off, but it's really, those are some themes as I come across here, and I was looking at Osseo and why I'm interested in being here. This is the only job I'm pursuing, and that's because I really believe that the work in front of Osseo really is a match to where my passion lies. There's some big work ahead, and it won't be easy, but boy, what a great opportunity for some of the big things in front, and that it really resonated with me on, that's where I think I can be very impactful and lead a team and work with multiple communities on accomplishing those big goals. There's so much in place here, and it would be building on so many successful things that have already happened in the district. But with, again, multiple communities here, great school districts really meet the needs of every community member, every student, every parent. That's what makes great districts what they are. So how do we continue to extend and reach out to maybe pockets or areas of our communities that maybe we're not meeting all their needs? That's exciting, and that's why I'm here, because I want to be a part of those next steps in the journey of Osseo. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Corey.
Please describe your skills in strategic and long-range planning. How would you work with stakeholders to implement our district's strategic plan? Describe your process to review and update the plan over time.
Yeah, thank you for this question. So we talk a lot about strategic and long-range planning, and this is I think the uniqueness about this, and every district goes through this process, and maybe districts, well, what I would want to learn coming into the system, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but coming in and really taking some time to listen and learn across all our stakeholder groups about what's important to them. When you talk about strategic planning and long-range planning, so the new superintendents needs to come in and really listen, so staff feel heard, so parents feel heard, our communities feel heard, so that their voices are present and reflected in the planning. The piece I think that's we're most comfortable with is you tend to identify what the challenges are, you analyze those challenges, you develop a plan, you evaluate that plan, and you make adjustments. But the key piece to me is along each of those steps you stop and you inform, and you'll hear me say this a lot, over communicate. You have to really message and communicate and take feedback at each point in that process. And there's a risk to move a little quickly through those steps. So really mapping out a timeline and a process, and I've seen it most effectively done in my experience has been you really do that thoughtfully, planfully, and intentionally, so that you are authentic and engaging all the stakeholders. And if you do that well, that can take some time to really listen to those voices, so that in the end, your plan has focus, it's driven, and people can get behind it and live it, so that it's real and it's tangible, and all believe that it is really in the end about high outcomes for all students, right? Because that's the whole point of your strategic plan. So having a clear timeline and process and communicating what that is on the very front end, and then collecting feedback and feed forward along the way is probably the key element in my mind as successful strategic planning has been in my experience. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, how would you develop a 21st century educational vision for our district and lead us to higher achievement and greater success for each student?
Great question. Well, the needs of our students are changing rapidly. Our needs to meet our what our families bring to the table and our communities, what our communities are looking for in our graduates, is also changing rapidly. So really, I think the key element as you develop a plan, probably is a theme throughout a lot of these questions, but again, this has got to be a collective effort and a collaborative effort. I'll probably have a chance to say this a few times, but my strengths really lie in how effective relationship building and collaboration, but with accountability and support. And when you develop an educational vision, that needs to be a collective vision. That needs to involve many stakeholders, again, so they can be behind it and it's tangible and it's real, and can you measure it? How do you know you're attaining that vision? So there's that accountability piece. So that takes lots of different modalities and a strong communication plan and access. We're gonna have to go to where our constituents are, where our stakeholders are, and really get to a place where they're comfortable sharing with us what they would want for their children, what our communities want for our graduates, what our staff want for our students. Maybe most importantly, what our students want for themselves, because they have a strong voice, and we can't underestimate strong student input and participation and ownership of our vision. If you can get all those elements together, you got a really good chance at having a strong vision that's lasting and can be implemented and supported and get results, because come back to, again, the best vision for future outcomes is results.
Thank you.
So you are the superintendent of Osseo area schools, and the district needs to reduce its budget by 3%. Describe to us how you would lead the district in this process, and what are the crucial components of your process?
Well, great question, and I've fortunately or unfortunately had this experience before in other systems. This has to be, again, be transparent. This process needs to be very transparent, and a lot of communication, again, throughout the process. And here's what I'll say: over-communicate again. I'm happy if people have to hear it for the 8th time, and I hear, man, I've heard this 8 times already, because there's probably someone who hasn't heard it at all. And mapping out why. Why are we here? How did we get here? And how do we move forward, and what's in that plan of moving forward? And then working with the board and the community on prioritization. What are our key priorities? When you go through a budget reduction process, you learn very fast what's most important. Many of our stakeholders have different priorities and different things that are important to them, but building a wide range of pieces of input. So from a procedural standpoint, you have to take the time necessary to gather authentic feedback and input in the process. So that needs to be done for a wide range of modalities. It's got to be done in person, in communities, and again, going to the communities for their input, but it also needs to be done electronically through social media, a variety of ways to gather input on what's important to, again, multiple communities in one school district. And then superintendent's job is to bring that information to you as a school board and give you the best opportunity to make the best decisions possible, so that you're comfortable in governing through that process, and then communicating back out all the way through that. Reductions are not fun for anyone, but it does help you focus. It does help you prioritize what's critical to student learning and ultimately success and outcomes for our students. So come back to those crucial components, communication, a clear timeline, a clear process with plenty of notification ahead of time, so that it's not rushed and it's thoughtful, it's intentional, it's planful. and being really clear in the front end why and how you're going to gather all the stakeholder input throughout the process. So that's a great question.
Thank you. What do you believe standardized test scores tell us and don't tell us about a school district? What are some examples of successful strategies you have implemented to address the achievement gap in your previous roles?
Well, I love this question because there inherently in this question, it acknowledges that there are things it tells us and there's things that it doesn't tell us. For example, the context around how scores or what a set of scores are telling us, either at the district level, a building level, across a level like secondary, elementary, or even down to a student. What sometimes a set of numbers doesn't tell you is what kind of progress has been made or what kind of progress hasn't been made over time. So it doesn't tell you trends. So a lot of times you want multiple data points just to help build that context. What I believe you have to work hard at is what is the context around the test scores? What are those scores? You have to take data and turn that into information. Numbers and data just, without context and meaning, how do you make meaning of those sets of data and test scores, and what does it tell us about how we're doing in moving towards higher achievement for all students? And that takes some unpacking, and that takes probably some vulnerability and willingness to look at what we're doing well, where our gaps are. So strategies-wise, you have to build a safe, from my experience, create a safe process for analyzing the data. And what does it tell us and not tell us? And then how can we dig deeper into getting those pieces? There's lots of things that don't show up in our test scores. And unpacking those variables and those contextual elements that are a part of the story and really telling that story more accurately through a wide range of information. So engaging staff, engaging parents, engaging students in what our performance is telling us. And really to move the system forward, because really test scores are just a form of feedback on how we're doing. And it's summative in the end, right? Our standardized scores really are at the end of something. So how can we engage all those folks in a process, a strategy, a successful strategy has been, how are we going to measure ourselves along the way and gather input and feedback so that when we get to standardized scores, maybe at the end of the school year, we're not surprised. We know what our trajectory is. We know what our story is telling us and how we're improving. In the end, this is an accountability measure, though. And how do we continue to move the system forward and get better results and higher results? And if our parents and our community and our staff are behind those strategies to improve, you never stop improving. We're never done. We never arrive on this continuous improvement effort. But we can engage all of our stakeholders that are invested in it, in the solutions and strategies. And if there's ownership, we're gonna move the needle on then higher levels of achievement. So there's just a few examples of how to move that forward.
Thank you. So Corey, what is your experience in planning for a growing district and meeting the programming and facility needs, including the consideration of boundary changes?
Timely question. I'm in the middle of helping lead the efforts of, again, the largest referendum passed in state history, and we're adding on to all 5 high schools in Anoka right now as we speak, and adding new schools, 2 new elementary schools, and moving about 5,000 students to new schools. That's a large effort. So the question here is, from an experience standpoint, how do you get this done? And from the beginning, again, it's back to engaging our communities. And what needs are we meeting, what needs are we not meeting in each of the communities, because they will look different in each of the pockets of our district. And really getting that authentic feedback and what can they support. And also, really providing quality, transparent information about why the need is there. What are the reasons, in the end, that's affecting our outcomes and meeting the needs of our students. And then it's studying, so it's back to that continuous improvement piece. really clearly identifying what the issue and challenge and problem is. I know you've had some work started on this already, and that's challenging, just really drilling down what's the core issue. Hopefully, you've got wide representation in that committee or team that's doing that identification and then analysis. Once you've analyzed that, then you, again, are informing and communicating constantly on what you're finding. And then you're getting to a point of what's the plan. And my experience is, offering choices helps. Option one gives you this, it does this, and it doesn't do that. And give your communities options. My experience in doing boundary work in a few different districts is when you can give input on a few choices or options and get feedback on what are the pros and cons of each choice, you're getting more meaningful feedback than saying, in the end, here's the only choice. Because others are going to come back with other ideas. So, and sometimes if you're doing a really nice job listening, you develop yet another option as you get through the process because you're listening to those voices. So you have to really ensure that you're getting authentic feedback and involvement and engagement in that process. And you got to be really careful to, maybe you got to, my experience is you got to go to your stakeholders, go to the communities and really go to where they're willing to meet you to get it. So that's going to where they're willing and comfortable gathering and getting that feedback and then coming back with a plan, proposing that plan, giving it plenty of time to digest and for folks to comment. When we went through this process in my current district, leading through that, we had over 1,000 emails and feedback on all the proposals. And then the board, that's information for you as a board. And are you on the right track with the proposals? Do you need to make adjustments in the proposals? So that when you get to making a point of making a decision, you as a board feel like you've really studied this and have examined everything as best you can. And then you're in the best position to make the best choice moving forward on where to make those investments or changes. So it is a long process. This can take, months, maybe 18 months is a window of time where you got to really do this. In the last district, because of the scope, it was 2 years. Where when you think of studying and getting all the way through the decision-making process, and you got another year of implementing and adjusting and support. And that's the last thing I'll say is just how do you support everyone involved through the process, because it can be a bit of a grieving process when you're going to change schools. And I always feel like when parents are troubled by a boundary change, that just tells me they really care about their school. They really care and they're invested and they like the staff there, and that's a really nice compliment in a weird way. But that just shows me that they care about that. And how are we going to support them through the transition with if it's a boundary change or facilities changes? So there's not much bigger work than this board will do if that's in the future, but it can be done successfully with intention and planful work and lots of stakeholder input. So that was a big one right there. That's a big question right there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please describe your past work implementing vocational and other skills-based training.
This was my example when I started tonight with our the students I was visiting at one of our technical high schools. So the work world is changing so fast. The demand for skilled workers is changing so fast, and really helping students, my past work is how do we continue to help our families and students see there's a wide range of pathways, and how do we keep building a wide range of choices? Again, back to our goal, and for me the vision, it's a simple vision for me in education, is how do we get kids successful in what they want to do? They leave our system and graduate and go on to something they're passionate about and are prepared for. So when it comes to vocational or other skills-based programs, that range of choices continues to expand. The challenge we have is how to continue to meet that demand, and how do we keep building more pathways to prepare our students for the work world that's coming. And we're getting employers looking to hire our graduates before they're done because the work needs are so vast out there. So really being planful and intentional about the offerings we bring. I would add that my past work in implementing this successfully is how do you evaluate whether we're meeting the needs? What data tells us we're preparing our students well, and are we meeting the range of choices that our communities demand for our workers? And so that's really engaging in our businesses, our community, and finding effective ways of listening to what the demands are there. And that's challenging. So that outreach has to be constant and measurable. And what, again, back to this, turning that data into action and outcomes. So what good success, or what success looks like there, is a wide range of offerings, students graduating with the work they want to do, and successful placement in those work, whether it's any range of post-secondary options. One of the best ways that we've been doing, or I've done over the years, is go talk to the students, do listening sessions with them, listen to our workers, and marry up that personalized feedback with the data that we collect, so that there's, again, context and meaning behind the information that we collect, and then turning that into action, and then being willing to revise our plan in response to that. So exciting opportunities in our, as we expand our vocational options.
Thank you. And I just wanted to mention we're at just past the halfway mark, and we just finished up half the questions. So we're doing
All right,
pretty well.
I appreciate the feedback. Thanks.
Okay, discuss a time when you made a decision that you would now have done differently. What would you have done differently, and what did you learn?
Yeah, this is a really good question. Well, I think one of the things we all struggle with is owning decisions that we would do over again, whether it's our personal lives or our professional lives, and being open to making adjustments. So a decision, I think that I'm thinking more recently over my career, I've had a number of times where I feel like, you probably learn more from your mistakes than you do for your successes. And I know that's been true as a dad. So, so a decision, I think that probably not so much in my last district, but I've had experiences like this in each district. But one that sticks out to me in one of my previous districts was when we had to go through a budget reduction process. You tend to set a timeline, and you try to take as much time as you can. And you have good intentions of getting feedback and voices as much as you can. But I come back to, you can't over-communicate. I just think when you're doing a tough, whether it's budget reductions or boundaries or something large, an equity plan, right? Making sure that you've had as much feedback and input as possible. And one of the decisions I felt like I would want to take back is not taking the time to get more input from our paraeducators and the other groups of staff impacted in the system. We tend to focus a lot on our teachers, and rightly so, but we have so many other groups of employees that are impacted by decisions we make. And so our paras and our bus drivers and our other support staff in our buildings are also impacted. And yet they are the eyes and ears of our operation, and they're our community members, and they're the ones that help us be ambassadors for our work. And I feel like at one point, I wish I did a better job getting input and feedback for others that initially didn't think were as impacted by it. And that was a lesson for me, to make sure whenever we make a big decision, really be intentional about getting feedback and input from all of our employees, and really listen to that input and feedback and make sure they feel heard and that they were listened to. So, lesson learned, yeah.
So I feel like you've talked about this one a little bit, but please describe strategies that you've used to seek the perspectives of multiple stakeholders. Specifically address how you did or would ensure that you hear the voices of families of color, English learners, and the LGBTQ community.
I was hoping you'd ask this question the way it was worded here. So we are right in the middle of my current work, and I'll use an example of what we're doing now. We're near the end of pushing forward a equity achievement plan in my current district, and that's my responsibility in my department to bring that forward. So we are immersed in this the last 2 years of going through a process to, in the end, bring that plan forward. From a strategy standpoint, so I'll use this Equity Achievement Plan as an example, first you have to take the time to analyze the context of your system. So you heard me say this earlier, but really be well tuned into what needs are and are not being met in each of our communities and each of our schools. And a topic of, or an initiative like an equity plan brings passion, brings emotion, and opportunity to really engage our community in this work. And we have a range, and I'm sure I would guess the same is true here, of a range of engagement, and some pockets of our communities are more than willing to engage, and others are very reluctant. And maybe they've had bad experiences before, or have not felt engaged or underrepresented or even marginalized in our system. So strategies that we feel like I think is helpful is, how do you really, with the use of data and information, really be intentional about how do you get input and feedback from all those sectors of our system, making sure it's really representative of our district, and then that participation in the process is authentic and meaningful, so that people really feel like their voices are heard and are really being considered and really listened to. And that's going to take a lot of thoughtful planning and lots of modalities. So again, back to multiple ways of reaching out, because across our system and in a large district like Osseo, our constituents have a variety of ways. Their comfort level of engaging is different. For some it's in person, for some it's social media, for some it's doing a survey, for some it's other things. So you got to have really wide-ranging efforts there, and you sort of got to look backwards and redress any past practices that have not been successful. Again, engage really meaningfully your communities and all the families. Make that meaningful. Turn that into outcomes. So in the end, how are we going to measure the success of the type of plan, or my example, the equity plan? And maybe here, I know your work has been in place for a number of years. How are we measuring what has been done is working? And how do we make adjustments if it's not meeting the needs of some of our communities or some of our students? So there's very intentional and planful ways to get there. And the superintendent's job, again, is to give you that information and ask you to guide us through that and govern through those strategies and give us clear direction on, in the end, how to come up with a plan that meets all the needs of all students.
Okay, thank you. How have you managed the relationship between the school board and superintendent, and what are the roles of each? What did you like or dislike? Did you make changes in this relationship while in your district?
Well, I love this question. Thank you for asking it. There's 3 of them here, I guess. So
Yeah, it's kind of a long one.
it's like any relationship, and I apologize for some of you who heard me say this before. Any relationship that you're willing to improve on takes really daily investment, and you really have to work at it intentionally all the time. So that brings with it, how do you build trust? You as a school board do not like surprises, and so it's being very intentional about bringing information to you and being transparent, and there's a level of vulnerability there too, as you build new relationships or maintain existing ones. And relationships have their ups and downs. That's what makes them stronger. So you have to have that trust element there when things don't always go well. Any school board has a range, hopefully a healthy range of opinion and a healthy range of values, core beliefs. And the more you can really honor that range, that's going to help us make really good decisions. I get nervous when we all start thinking alike in the same way, because I worry we're going to miss perspectives that can really be damaging. So this really comes down to frequent, daily, regular communication. And that takes time and energy and effort, right? So just like any relationship, you have to invest in it. And I don't know if it's a like or dislike, it's just like any relationship, it's a bit demanding, right? So you have to work at it and you have to prioritize your time. So as a superintendent, for me, it would be prioritizing my time to make sure I'm communicating very strongly with all of you, or whatever protocols we have in place for communication, because I think clear expectations on how we communicate with each other is critical, so that you breed and have trust amongst all of us, and having some real clear parameters around how that works is important. When those things aren't in place, I've seen and experienced challenges amongst board members or with the superintendent. So having very clear, transparent expectations, and then honoring and delivering on those expectations is really important, especially when they're tested, because they're going to get tested when we're making tough decisions, and revisiting those expectations regularly, making sure they're still where we're at. In 6 months or a year, we might have different beliefs around things, and so let's reframe and refresh those expectations on how we're going to work together. And that's not easy work, but necessary to be successful, because in the end, again, it's about how do we do best for our students in our system and support our parents and families and communities. So that's an ongoing, never-ending effort.
Okay, thank you. How do you ensure that the district recruits, hires, and motivates the finest educators? How do you recruit employees of color and employees who are racially conscious for all positions in the district?
I love this question too. How much time do we got? This is a great question.
10 minutes left. 3 more questions after this.
Well, I think you have to be very intentional with your efforts here. So how do we recruit and retain is an element here too. How do we keep folks wanting to stay here once we get them here? So this gets deeper to just our professional lives. When you talk about what people do for their profession, it's really what they're about, and this is about their livelihood and their families, and why they choose to work where they do. And for many of our employees, there's lots of choices to go. So why come here? Well, we need to make sure that their work is rewarding and fulfilling. They see themselves successful. They are supported. There's lots of different ways, especially when we talk about how do we continue to attract and retain employees of color. It's disheartening to see when you look at the 70+ thousand, I think it is, of teachers in the state, and you got a small fraction of licensed teachers of color where it's a recruiting challenge, right? How do we want them to come here? Well, they're going to want to feel supported, and we need our students to see themselves in our staff, and our students of color in our staff, and they need to, it's really about engagement and relationships. And I think when people feel connected and supported in their work, they stay. So if you were to talk to the people that have been in our system, I met one of the Osseo employees just today, and he's been here 30 years. Probably a good reason is connections, relationships, and they believe in the work. There's a core value piece in the work. So if we can be successful at recruiting folks and want to be here, and believe in our efforts, and believe in our strategic priorities, and believe in the direction that our board and the superintendent sets for them, they're going to want to come here. If we get results and we can show that we're making results, they're going to want to stay here, because they're going to feel like they're making a difference in the lives of children, and that they're feeling successful in their work. And I'll throw in one last thing, is this recognition. We got to be really good at recognizing staff for their hard work across the system on all levels. I don't think we can do that enough. As simple as a thank you, just thanking people for their hard work and acknowledging and recognizing their efforts is a critical element. And if we can do that well, we're going to recruit, we're going to retain, and we'll continue to build on the already strong staff that Osseo already has.
How would you handle decisions that are unpopular with the public, but educationally and or financially necessary? Please give an example.
Yeah, number of examples. This is a great question too. You guys really have been thoughtful about your questions here. the first two things that come to my mind about unpopular is either budget cuts and or boundary changes, because those hit emotional chords with people. I think in either case, and I've lived both of those in multiple districts, you really have to be, I know I sound like a broken record here, transparent with the why. What are the factors that are causing us to be in this position? And what do we got to do moving towards a better place on this? So information is critical. Facts, and I say information and not data again because we got to have meaning and people got to understand why we're here. You also have to allow space for feedback, allow space for input, and I guess I feel like when my experience is when people are really challenging or really having a hard time with this, it's maybe because we haven't done as good a job as we need to with being really good listeners and really recognizing and reflecting that feedback and input. Even when it's hard to hear, can we take that information back and use that, whether it's feeding that to you as a board or one of our committees that is doing the analysis work, that feedback we get, our community needs to see that we're doing something with that feedback and that it's really being thoughtfully considered and was in the mix when we made that decision. So when you as a board make that decision, you can say, we really thought hard about that feedback, and it was, and our community can see it was considered carefully, and it was evident in the process. So that, they may be able to understand the decision, they may not agree, but at least there's an understanding behind how you got there. So there's some key strategies along the way there and really important steps that take time and space to get done. And so you could plug in a lot of different, for me, examples, like I said, boundaries, budget cuts, staffing decisions. There's a number of things here, but there's some common threads there that when you make tough, unpopular decisions, if you do that well and it's with care and with lots of thought and understanding that you can try to get people behind it even if they don't agree.
Thank you.
All right.
So 5 more minutes, one
Thanks.
question and a statement. So,
All right.
Please explain how you would go about setting a strategy to capture a higher percentage of eligible students who live in our district but do not attend District 279 schools.
Well, I think this is probably one strategy. There's probably many, and longer conversation, but one I would point out is I think you would capture a higher percentage if families and students see opportunity for them. So are we offering a wide range of opportunities or options, programmatic options? So on both ranges of our continuum. So what do we do to support struggling learners? And do families feel supported and feel success with students? And then on the high achieving end, our gifted and talented students or families, do they see options for them to take them higher? Are there programmatic options, and do they feel like we're bringing to the table offerings, programs, classes where they feel like we can really take them to their highest potential, their highest options? If families don't see that, they're going to search for it. They're going to look for it. How well do we market those options? Have we built a continuum in place? How well do we engage our communities? Are we reaching out to pockets of our communities that don't feel like their needs are being met? And if we can build strong choices and strong success, because measures and outcomes matter, and our communities look at results. So can we build a trend of strong results, and that really says we're going in a place where they want their children to attend and have the best outcomes for them.
thank you. And I'll take the last question, which is basically, is there anything else you would like us to know about you as we consider your candidacy for the superintendent of Osseo area schools?
Well, before I go there, I just want to say thank you for your time. This is a tough process. I don't envy the position you're in, and I appreciate the opportunity to be considered for the position. I guess I would just say, come back to where I started at the beginning of the interview. I've been fortunate to have a wide range of experiences in multiple systems, and I feel like I've been able to take lots of learning from that. No problem. I'm going to come back to, I chose Osseo for a reason to pursue here, because I really feel like my passion and the things I want to invest in, and my family in, because this is a team effort, align with the work in front of this district. And I think my experience and my core values personally match with where you want to go and what this district's about. And I've been very intentional about where I think I want to work here when it comes to being a superintendent. So I really believe there's a strong foundation here, lots of success, that this can only be a springboard to even greater outcomes. And I get very excited the more I've been researching and studying the work here. I just really feel like it's a really good fit personally and professionally. And really excited about the potential that's coming here. So, you know, there's a personal side to it, I guess, and a professional side, you know, and for me to invest in this process and want to be here, I want to say that this has been a family commitment as well. I have 3 young daughters of my own and a wife that's also a school administrator, and we don't make these decisions lightly. So I love where this system's going, and I really believe I can help lead the district to even greater things.
All right.
So thanks, Mike, for that question.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, good luck.
Well, good evening. Thanks for coming this evening.
Thank you.
Just wanted to go over the ground rules. We have 14 questions there in front of you and 45 minutes to get through them. So and I will be keeping time and give you some waypoints as we go through to keep us on track. And with that, I will start with the first question. Please describe your professional experience and training and how it has prepared you for this position. Tell us specifically why you are interested in being the superintendent of Osseo area schools.
Well, I can tell you straight out that my interest in Osseo Public Schools, area public schools, I was reinforced about a half hour ago when I was visiting Caribou just down the road. I had a chance to visit with 3 students from Osseo High School. Wow. I kind of interjected into their study group on AP Chem and I said, what do you like about Osseo High School? And assuming that they were in the district, I asked them and asked if I could interrupt them. And they've all smiled and they said they love it. They commented on the close community on the part of the students. They said it's just kind of, it's a tight community. Students, it's positive, they get along. They talked about how they're involved in lacrosse and track and cross country and National Honor Society, and they went on and on and on. Very pleasant. Wish me luck in the interview, but I had a chance to sit down with them about 10 minutes and hear about the district and the high school through their eyes. One of the students moved in to Osseo High School just in the past year. The other 2 had kind of gone up through the system, and they all had great things to say. In particular, I just want to share this with you. They talked about the staff and how the staff goes the extra mile and helps them and understands and listens and cares about them. Yeah, more than one said that, and they also talked about that a number of staff that are alumni. And so it just kind of speaks to that family. Again, that's one high school in a large district, but I think it speaks volumes. And I just wanted to share that with you, that through their words and their eyes, it really reinforced my interest in the district. And it echoes what I've heard from colleagues, what I've heard from other people that work in the district, but to hear it through students' eyes. I got to start my day this morning with a group of about 15 students at Apple Valley High School. And the superintendent's cabinet, we met with them this morning and talked about what they like about that school and what goes well and what would they change if they could. And it was really neat to start my day with students at Apple Valley High School and end my day with students from Osseo High School with a similar conversation. And it was great. So I just wanted to start with that. A little bit about my professional experience and journey in education. I'm a lifelong Minnesotan. And I think my whole life in Minnesota and professionally in Minnesota as a part of that. And I think I can speak to the value of education and how that's perceived in Minnesota, and particularly in the metro area. I spent 30 years in education as a teacher, a building administrator, as a district level leader, and in the metro area. And I currently, in the last 30 years, have worked in Rosemont, Apple Valley, Egan schools. It's a large district, 4th largest in the state. It's interesting looking at the number of data points, similarities between Rosemont, Apple Valley, Egan, and Osseo area schools. Size, number of buildings, demographics, and some dynamics in different parts of the district along with that. I've got experience at the district level working in a district that represents multiple communities. 3 cities and multiple townships, similar to the Osseo area schools. And I think there's a certain complexity that goes along with that. And I guess with that scope, a certain amount of process and thinking that has to go through and leading initiatives and change. And so I think I bring that to the table. One other thing I was going to note about my professional journey, the last 10 years I've been at the district level. One thing unique about my current district that I'm in, 4th largest district in the state, we have no assistant superintendents, no associate superintendents, and I always try to point that out. We have a team of directors, which we're all kind of on the same level. We all have a wide range of responsibility. Director of Finance, okay, I'm Director of Teacher Learning. I work K-12 across 32 sites. So we have a team of about 8 directors, no assistant or associate superintendent. So sometimes people ask, when they look quick glance at the resume, I'm a Director of Teaching and Learning, and I just wanted to share that's at the kind of same role, same level, just that our district kind of has that flat hierarchy with the directors. So I just wanted to share that because that's not everyone maybe catches that, not knowing about the district. Again, tracing my professional journey, I started out as a social studies teacher at the middle school in that district. I absolutely loved the role, was encouraged to pursue some leadership roles, and I did that at the building level. As, kind of a dean role, and then assistant principal, and then principal, and all those roles were in the same school at Dakota Hills Middle School in Eagan. And really proud of kind of the sense of family that we cultivated there when I was principal, and working with people that I had taught alongside, but they embraced me as a leader of that building for several years. And I never forget, they gave me a standing ovation when I was selected principal, and they gave me a standing ovation as a faculty when I chose to go to the district level and was asked to lead in that way. So I take pride in cultivating a sense of community, whether it be a building or a district or the department that I'm leading. That's been very important to me. I think two hallmarks of my professional journey is always having a collective sense of where we are headed, that collective vision, and then also building that place and that environment, that community where people want to be, both staff and students. And I think those two things are hugely important.
All right, thank you.
Describe your skills in strategic and long-range planning. How would you work with stakeholders to implement our district's strategic plans? Describe your process to review and update the plan over time.
Well, I have to say the last 10 years, I feel like every day I'm living a planning process as Director of Teaching and Learning in large-scale ways and in smaller ways. I've been a part of all our strategic planning in my current district and led subcommittees within that and been a part of the planning team for that with the superintendent. I've also led a number of large task forces with stakeholders, with parents, students, staff, district and building staff, our learning and technology vision in the district, which was comprehensive and very unique, and that culminated in a capital project levy that went along with that, along with our bond, and I was involved in being a spokesperson for that and planning the capital project levy and kind of leading that campaign. That all emanated from the task force and that strategic planning. Looking at your strategic plan in the district, comprehensive, a lot of different strategic work areas in your district. I think as a new superintendent, I think again as a person who listens and learns about the district, I think a key element to that listening and learning is identifying what's the strategic work, what's the high leverage work that people have been putting energy around, and I would want to truly understand that, the context, the history, and what's working within that, and maybe what's not working. What are the enablers? What's working well? What are the barriers? What's getting in the way? And I think with the existing strategic plan, getting a handle on that and as a superintendent, and also looking to work with the board and with the superintendent's cabinet to say, how can we extend that? How can we strengthen that? How can we extend that? I think ultimately every district cycles through, and Osseo area schools will be no different, of cycling through to a new process for a strategic planning process. I've been involved with every part of those kind of processes, and would look to pull together a planning team and work with the board and district and building leadership to make sure that we had stakeholders at the table from all roles in the district and all areas of the district, and then moving through a process to identify, what are the priorities and goals, and then moving to, okay, what are those strategic actions, if you will. I like to call it strategic work, or focused strategic work. And then also identifying what are those measurables. Mike at the last meeting talked about the KPIs, those key performance indicators, but identifying those measurables and knowing that it's quantitative and qualitative. And also keeping an eye that it takes time. Implementing a strategic plan has to have a long view, and change does not happen overnight. Yeah, but I think a real key is how do you build on and extend what's working well, okay, and then try to think forward from there. So the first part, again, to reiterate, would be to really try to get a firm understanding of what is the current plan, what's the context and history with that, current strategic work, extend that while starting to lay the groundwork for that next planning cycle.
Thank you.
How would you develop a 21st century educational vision for our district and lead us to higher achievement and greater success for each student?
I like the fact that it says each student. Because our mission is not that some students learn or some students achieve at high levels, but it's all students learn. That's our mission. So I like the fact that it says each student. In regards to 21st century educational vision, there are the learning and technology vision that I that I did lead in the district was founded on the ISD standards, the International Standards for Technology and Education. And those have been adapted in a variety of format, but really it's 21st century skills. And a lot of skills that you can't measure on a standardized achievement test. But that are incredibly important for the workforce, and you hear that when you talk to business leaders. But the thinking critically, the collaborating, the ability to communicate, the ability to work with others, that curiosity that is associated with inquiry, those are 21st century skills, and I think the system has to be geared towards that. Yes, standardized measures are important. Yes, they are a measure of what we do, but they're only one measure. And I think a leader has to have that and a system has to have that holistic view, and keeping in mind that we're preparing our students for tomorrow's workforce, jobs that haven't been created yet. And sometimes that's a cliche, but the data bears that out. That's true. But those skills that I mentioned are what carries forward into allowing those students to be adaptable, to transfer those skills. So going back to the question, how would I lead towards that? I think part of that is rolled into a strategic plan. I think part of that is modeled every day through conversations by what the leader or leadership values. I think what the questions you ask shows what you value, and eventually what you measure, those quantitative and qualitative, okay, shows what you value and leads to what gets done. But I think where a leader shows interest, where a leader asks questions, starts to direct that ship. And I think that'd be the first step for those, through those 21st century skills. And again, the strategic planning process would be another avenue to lead towards that as well.
You are the superintendent of Osseo area schools, and the district needs to reduce its budget by 3%. Describe to us how you lead the district in this process, and what are the crucial components of your process?
Unfortunately, a time that I guess all districts in the state live in and cycle through. Every district in the state is at a different stage in that process right now, but a common process. Big things that are drivers right now, the special ed cross subsidy, and then also the funding not keeping pace with inflation. That's affected every district in the state. My current district, no different. My first 3 years as a director of teaching and learning, member of Superintendent's cabinet, we had to make 3 successive years of budget adjustments. That was in the recession, where we had flat funding from the state. So I navigated that as a part of that team, and within my own department, I had to start first day on the job looking at how we're going to make budget adjustments, what process are we going to put in place. So I lived that for 3 years. This past year, we had to make $7 million of budget adjustments going into next year, so I was part of that process from the very beginning as well, and leading that within my department. Another example I'll give, and then I'll speak more to the question here directly, and I referred to this in my first interview, but the achievement integration budget is something that falls currently under my umbrella, and a little over $4 million in our district. And we had 2 schools that were additional schools that were identified as racially identifiable schools, and the board chose to move forward with magnet schools because that had been very successful in our district with a couple other schools. And but in order to do that, transportation was a big expenditure, and the only funding source we had was the integration budget. But we had a lot of programs that were supported by that budget, and so the pie didn't grow, but the demand on that budget grew, and I had to lead a process with community and staff and parents, students to basically make about a $1 million adjustment in that budget, redirected to the magnet schools, and involve people in the process to say, okay, how can we still have strong programs that were supported by that budget, but we've got to think differently, look differently, and we've got to kind of spread the adjustments a little bit. So I've led on a large scale and a small scale budget adjustment processes. As superintendent of Osseo area schools, If we need to reduce the budget by 3%, I would start by assembling a planning team, superintendent's cabinet level leadership, and to identify the process. That process would have to include stakeholder input, building administrators, staff, community. There's a lot of ways to do that with a combination of focus groups, surveys, direct input, electronic input, face-to-face. So it's gathering input, communicating from the get-go to the community about why we need to do this, what the target is, if there are any priorities right out of the gate in terms of trying to keep it away from the classroom, budget cuts or adjustments away from the classroom, that would be communicated right away. Communicate the process, gather that input, and then I would have a fairly large committee that works through looking at that data and saying, okay, here's our target, here's ideas of efficiencies, cuts, revenue enhancements, and then we start piecing together. I also think it's important for the outcome of that committee to come to the board with some choices, with scenarios. So scenario A, scenario B, scenario C. Maybe all getting to the same target or maybe getting to different levels of a monetary target. But I think it's important to come with choices and to come with information. And along with that, a recommendation from administration, but maybe that recommendation is choice A or B, and then having the board, direct and weigh in and choose that. But huge on process, stakeholder input, huge on clear communication from the very beginning, and then also fundamental having choices for the board in the end.
Thank you. What do you believe standardized test scores tell us and don't tell us about a school district? What are some examples of successful strategies you have implemented to address the achievement gap in your previous roles?
I referenced briefly earlier about standardized test scores. It is an important measure. It's one measure. I think when I look at standardized test scores, I always pause and try not to just look at a point in time. I think you have to look at it over time, longitudinally. In fact, I always caution people looking at our standardized test score data from one year to the next doesn't paint that picture. Not only, unless you're following maybe the same cohort of students over time, but if you're following different cohorts of students over time, so if you're looking at third grade every year, I think you have to look over several years. And if you see a trend down or up or flat, okay, then you can start to make some generalizations. But looking at it 1 year or just from 1 year to the next doesn't give you the whole picture. And even if you're looking at cohort students over time, you have to look over multiple years, and you have to keep in mind, at least in Minnesota, that the, for lack of a better word, I'll say rigor of the test in 5th grade might not be at the same percentile bar as the rigor of test in 4th grade. I mean, there's some nuances to that. So I always like to look at over time. I also like to look at multiple measures. Okay, so you're looking at MAP or measure of academic progress and MCAs. Okay, or if you're able to add in another data point like your a local literacy assessment or ACT, depending upon the grade level, you look at multiple measures. I think that's key. So what do they tell us? They can tell us a lot if we look at it in totality. Multiple measures, and we look at it over time for trends. Examples of successful strategies I've implemented in my current role to address the achievement gap. One of the hallmark pieces that we've implemented, and it took a lot of time, is a system of individual literacy assessment. All of our, 13,000 elementary students are assessed one-on-one with their classroom teacher prior to the start of the school year. They get to come in before school starts. They have a one-on-one meet and greet with their teacher, which is powerful beyond any assessment. But they get to meet that teacher. It's a one-on-one literacy assessment where the teacher's listening to the student read and looking at multiple measures. So this teacher and the teacher team have a really accurate data of their students prior to the start of school year, and it's individualized. We also have assessments 3 other times during the year where that same measure is used. So we introduced a new assessment measure and a new system, and we made a calendar change. We worked with the union, and we worked with our parent community and staff, and we reduced the 2 days from the end of the year for elementary teachers and students, and put those 2 days in the front of the year before student day starts. And so the staff calendar, the number of days remain the same. The student calendar was reduced by 2, but what we found is the investment of that one-to-one literacy assessment and the times during the year far outweighed those 2 days in June, those 2 days, instructional days in June. And so that was a powerful piece with 13,000 students across 19 elementary schools. That has given us data, formative data, to start the year and during the year, which really helps pinpoint and helps launch in early interventions, whether it be reading recovery or our leveled literacy intervention, which is a small group. Reading recovery is one-on-one, and it really helps us be proactive. And I think it's been a powerful systems change for our district. We also, along with that, if we want to talk K-12, at the same time, about the same time, a little before we implemented that, we also made a calendar adjustment where we converted 3 student contact days, a couple years before the literacy assessment, 3 student contact days to staff development, but we strategically placed them during the year. So every 6 weeks, there's a staff development time. And the key was, if we were going to exchange that student time, that staff development time had to be purposeful. So the teachers are together in collaborative teams, whether it be a first grade team or whether it be a high school physics team, and they're looking at data and working together with an extended period of time, not just a prep time and so forth, but an extended period of time that's focused, and the entire staff is focused on that every 6 weeks. So that literacy assessment piece that I mentioned earlier folds nicely into that, where as a whole, as a staff, you can look at that data every 6 weeks. So we're really purposeful how we structured the school year. It took a lot of communication because a lot of people are talking about extending the school year. And those 2 examples, we in some ways, we shortened the school year. But I think it's much more purposeful, and we're much more efficient with our time, and the data helps drive what we do. And rather than waiting to have data at the end of the year, the summative data. And we've seen changes, and sometimes it varies by school and grade level, but we've seen shifts in our achievement and in that achievement gap, because you have data, especially elementary level, on those students that maybe are coming into first grade or second grade that are not reading. And it's not data from the previous school year, a second grader from the previous school year, because there's a summer slide with all students almost. It is data for that school year. So I could go on and on about that, but that's a systems change we made with purpose and investment and working with a community, the teachers union, and focused on the why.
All right, thank you. Next question, what is your experience in planning for a growing district and meeting the programming and facility needs of the district, including the consideration of boundary changes?
I mentioned when I started the interview, one of the things is the similarities between my current district and Osseo Area Public Schools. Not only the size and some of the demographics, but also growth. And the growth that you're experiencing, looking at, on the northwest side of the district. And my current district right now is on the southeast. The U of M is about ready to release a huge tract of lands called Umore Park, and it's just going to be just this aggressive growth. We've had we had an era of stability. In the 80s, we had a fast growth in that part of and lately it's been stable or slightly declining. It started the last few years to rise, and now we're on that uptick. We just built a new elementary school. So I've had the luxury of being a part of Superintendent's cabinet, being a part of those planning processes and bringing in that software to help us with a committee making decisions about, okay, if we do something here, what's the ramification of that, the K-12 software. And been a part of those processes where we build in voice for the community and focus groups and input and communicating along the way, always coming to the board with choices, recommendations, but choices within that. So I feel fortunate, I think, that I've been in a district that has managed growth and managed the opportunities with growth. Sometimes it involves boundary adjustments, not always. But sometimes it does, and I think one of the best ways to manage that is to phase in boundary adjustments over time. And I think it's easier for families, especially if they've got multiple children, is that you phase in, and in the short term you might end up providing a little additional busing to give those choices, but then you phase in that boundary adjustment and eventually becomes a hard adjustment, let's say after 5 years as an example. We've been pretty successful with that. Also over time, even when the district is not growing, looking for efficiencies and kind of mini processes where we look at maybe non-contiguous areas and say, okay, you know, what might we do here to make it more efficient with transportation or what have you, or space at certain schools if they're under or over capacity. When we've done that, we've also phased that in, communicated it well to parents, phased it in over time, given choice, let's say over the span of 5 years. So in the end, you get to a hard boundary that people accept and makes sense. And some parents choose to make the change early, given their certain situation. Some parents choose to make it later. It's a little investment up front with transportation, but I think it really softens that boundary adjustment. Let me make sure I addressed all parts of that there. I mentioned earlier my involvement with capital projects levy and the bond, which was in part, our bond was common with other districts, I think, in the last few years, but with safety and security, technology, okay, and then space, kind of 3 pillars there. And because we had needs in all 3 areas. So I was involved in the planning of all of that. I led the technology portion. So one of those, kind of the 3-legged stool, I led one of the legs of the stool, and then was at the table as a part of that overall planning committee as well. So I've got experience in that.
Thank you. And just from a timing standpoint, we're just now hitting the halfway mark, and we're a little bit past halfway of the time.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Please describe your past work implementing vocational and other skills-based programs.
Well, as the Director of Teaching and Learning, our career development program in our district falls under my umbrella. So one of my coordinators is responsible for that and collaborates with our high school staff with that, and some of our middle school staff as well. And pretty robust programming, vehicle services, health sciences, partnerships at the zoo. We kind of run the gamut, IT. So broad range of programming in our district. Students have the capability to enroll at one high school and then go to another high school for a double period class if it interests them and fits into their schedule. So the way the program sets up, efficiencies is maybe vehicle services offered at one building, but students from all schools can enroll in that. And that's the way all of our career development is set up. I'm involved at the director level in terms of supervising and implementing those. I have a staff that manages the day-to-day and works with the principals on that. And I would say that my role comes in kind of guiding and problem solving and overall vision for that, and also the funding of that, the career technical levy funding, which funnels through my office. Perkins, we're the consortium leader for a Perkins consortium, and so we administer that for 3 districts. That funnels through my office as well. So funding, overall direction, problem solving, and growing the program. But I have to give credit to the coordinator in charge of that program for really the energy and impetus behind that, whether it be growing the new construction trades program, or, I mean, it's you've had the right people energized and I'm in those roles, they can, I'm there to support them and empower them. So.
Thank you.
Discuss a time when you made a decision that you would now have done differently. What would you have done differently, and what did you learn?
It's a great question. I think every staff member, every leader needs to be reflective. And we need to be reflective as an organization, as teams, and I think as individuals, and that includes the superintendent. I can give one example that comes to mind. When I was charged with leading a process to develop our learning technology vision and then the corresponding levy that came with that, it was a broad stakeholder process, and had a lot of investment, and it took a lot of time to lead that well. And we were newly into our elementary literacy model, which I kind of spoke to a little bit earlier, at least part of that model. And at the time, our director of elementary ed, kind of a great colleague that I worked with, kind of said she would kind of take the lead and spearhead that, and it freed up me to give a little bit more energy to the learning technology vision, just because they're both so consuming. And that was the right decision. However, I don't believe that myself and then she and I together developed a strong intentional communication plan, or not as good as it could have been. We worked together well, but we were both incredibly busy. And because we're both incredibly busy, and those were two big programmatic initiatives, sometimes we felt like we were two ships passing in the night. And I think as director of teaching and learning, looking back, I think I needed to build in a stronger communication loop to make sure that I was vested and involved and kind of on top of things. Not that it wasn't working well, but I just think there was a gap in my, I guess, involvement, if you will, as director of teaching and learning. And I think if I had to do it over again, I just would have been a little bit more intentional and structured with the communication piece, just because we were both so busy in leading those improvements.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please describe strategies that you've used to seek the perspectives of multiple stakeholders. Specifically address how you did or you would ensure that you hear the voices of families of color, English learners, and the LGBTQ community.
One of my priorities is always to make sure that we have stakeholders involved in process, whether it be a levy, whether it be a budget adjustment, whether it be a boundary adjustment, whether it be a new program, task force. Stakeholder involvement is key, whether it be staff, parents, students, community members. Some examples that I can give in regards to the groups mentioned there. I'm proud of the fact that English Learners falls under my umbrella, Director of Teaching and Learning. We got a huge English Learner program in our district. Great people leading it. We were planning our summer camps, our Newcomer Academy, which has been pretty successful in our district, and we involve parent voice and student voice in that to make sure that we're on target, to make sure the experience matches the goal, and make sure that we're listening to the experience of students and parents. So that's an example I give there. Voices of Families of Color, our equity work in our district, which again falls under my umbrella as well. And so being very intentional with listening and process and planning events and making sure that we're in tune to the needs of the community. Our cultural family advocates, we have a team of about 12 now cultural family advocates, whether it be Somali advocates, Latino or Latinx advocates, American Indian, African American, so forth. That group works with our equity coordinator and builds in, they're in constant communication with our families, but we also have formalized pieces too, where every 3 years we map out our achievement integration plan and have our community collaboration council, and we're very intentional having a large group and different stakeholders represented in that. So I've been a part of planning those and facilitating those and being a participant in those. And with the LGBTQ community as well. Oftentimes in our district that ends up at the building level with support for those, so our high schools namely. So the leadership with that oftentimes is at the building level. I'm there partnering with our director of secondary ed and our high school principals or assistant principals or staff, okay, in addressing things and making sure that there's voice and making sure that students believe there's voice and have examples of that. That's not something that I would say I manage directly. I support others in managing that. Our equity coordinator and our high school administrators really and counselors are kind of on kind of that, I guess, front line and partnering shoulder to shoulder with students. But that's something that I do support as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. How have you managed the relationship between the school board and superintendent, and what are the roles of each? What did you like or dislike? Did you make changes in this relationship while in your district? Or in your role, since you weren't a superintendent there?
Absolutely. You know, I think there's the broad brush of that governance and policy, and then the management of the district. Those two different pieces. I should say two related pieces. And I think, you know, I would say a Venn diagram where you've got the governance piece, the major focus of the board, and then you've got the leadership and management day-to-day of the district, the operations, if you will, and supervision of staff. But that Venn diagram, those two areas intersect and overlap, and they should. And so there's that middle area where there's a lot of conversation. I think sometimes school boards can, temporarily sway one way in that Venn diagram, and maybe a superintendent might be swaying one way or in that diagram as well. So I think it's, okay, how do we make sure that we have that balance? Okay, leadership in the district, it's a school board, the superintendent, district and building administration working together, okay, but to make sure that we have that balance so that we're efficient and we're purposeful. I think that's the goal, and to have that strong communication, which is key. How I've managed the relationship, and as you know, I'm one of the directors in the fourth largest district in the state, and a member of superintendent's cabinet, so I have relationships with the board in a variety of ways, in a variety of meetings, and committee meetings, and presentations, and listening sessions, but I'm not currently in the superintendent role in terms of having that direct, regular, weekly communication with the board. But I think if you contacted any of our board members and asked them about Steve Trone, they would say that I've got a strong communication with them, a strong respect and rapport and integrity with the school board. It comes out in my letters of recommendation, but you could call any of the board members and say, tell me about Steve. And I think they would echo that. We've got a long-serving board in the district. Chair's been on the board like between 20 and 30, almost 30 years. We've had other members that have been on the board for 20 years. We've got some new members. I've got strong relationships with all of them, and both when I was a building principal and now the last 10 years as director. And I think that they would say that I carry forward it together with our superintendent, carry forward that balance and good communication, and lead and manage and inform the board, and then also being conscious of that balance and that partnership. Really, I would say that the superintendent and the board has to be a partnership. Has to be a partnership. The last part of that question: did you make changes in the relationship while in your district? We've got a long-serving board that most of them predated me in my current role, and I've been in my current role 10 years, and so it's just continuing to strengthen the relationships that we have. There hasn't been many major changes. We've had, in my tenure, 30 years in the district, I suppose we've had 4 different superintendents in those 30 years, and I feel like as a building and district administrator, I've had a good relationship with the board throughout that.
All right, thank you. We have 3 more questions and your final statement. We have about 8-9 minutes left. So how do you ensure that the district recruits, hires, and motivates the finest educators? And how do you recruit employees of color and employees who are racially conscious for all positions in the district?
I think one of the most important roles of administrators in the district, most often building administrators, but is to recruit and hire quality staff, and also district level administrators, but I'm thinking broadly as, in most cases, teachers and other staff. Incredibly important. I think I've was known as a building principal and also as a director. If you talk to my coordinator team, they would say, if Steve doesn't find the candidate that he wants, he'll repost. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of that. We should have a high standard. High standard, and fit is important. And I encourage principals as well. If you don't find the right person, you repost. It's that important. It's that important. In our current district, one of the things that we've done, I think we want to also be proactive at the elementary level. We moved up our staffing window as absolutely early as we can to be proactive in getting a jump on the recruiting of staff. That's been huge. We have our elementary principals interview together in teams because more often than not, we're hiring not just for a school, we're hiring for the district because that teacher may get placed or displaced from one building to another based on ebbs and flows in enrollment and sections and so forth. So principals interviewing together as teams, especially at the elementary level, and moving that window up as soon as possible has been key, and I've helped promote that. Employees of color, a challenge for all districts in Minnesota. It's been a big conversation. I'm part of Reimagine Minnesota, and I've been a part of the Reimagine Minnesota process as a representative from our district throughout the entire process the last couple of years. So one of the priorities is that recruiting and retaining staff of color. It's a challenge when you look at the statistics of the universities in Minnesota, colleges, universities that have teacher ed programs, and you look at the percent that are student teachers, if you will, or staff of color coming out of those programs, it's quite low. So I think districts, and I imagine Osseo is no different, in looking at what are those alternate pathways. Can we encourage and find ways to incentivize paraprofessionals to pursue teaching positions? Can we look at our students and encourage them to go into the profession as well? And I think those efforts, I think, and partnering with colleges, universities, and I think what I'm hearing lately, and we've been pretty aggressive reaching out to colleges and universities, but I think they're finding that a lot of districts are reaching out. So it's a competitive marketplace for quality staff and for quality staff of color. It's a competitive marketplace. So I think you have to keep pushing and trying to be creative and think outside the box a little bit. I think all of that is important.
Thank you.
How would you handle decisions that are unpopular with the public, but educationally and or financially necessary? Please give an example.
Yeah, it's going to happen. It does happen. I think acknowledging, number one, I think as a superintendent, acknowledging that there will be times that is the case. That's just reality. There will be conflict. There will be disagreement. That is reality. That does not mean that things aren't working. It doesn't mean that things are bad. Okay, it's a people business. It's a large organization. There's financial pressures. There's different people with different values. So there's a lot of dynamics. There is going to be conflict. There is going to be disagreement. There are going to be people that might say that a particular decision was not the right one or it's not popular by their measure. But again, I think it's key in, number one, having those respectful relationships and building that trust, number one. And a person might disagree with the final decision, but if they respect you as a leader, trust you as a leader, know that there was a process, and if they understand the rationale, even if they don't agree with the final outcome, there was a process. I trust the people involved in the process. There's a clear rationale. I think as a leader, you can stand on that. I think a leader, you also have to be very in tune to your own values. When I was principal, going back 10 years ago when I was principal at Dakota Hills, I had 3 questions, and I was really transparent with the staff. I said, what's best for students and student learning? That's the first question. The second question is what's most manageable for staff? They're the ones serving our students day in and day out in the class. What's most manageable for staff? Okay, and then the third question is, how do we make it better? And I think that contributes to that forward lean as an organization. How do we make it better? And I would always ask those questions in order. I had them posted up all the way through the school, and the staff knew that that's our process. Regardless of large scale, small scale, that's our process.
Thank you.
Okay, please explain how you would go about setting a strategy to capture a higher percentage of eligible students who live in our district but do not attend District 279 schools.
Remember at the first interview, I think Mike, when I was asking what I had, what would be cause the board to say, wow, we hired the right superintendent. One of the things you mentioned was a capture rate, and that increasing.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think that for all districts, that's important. I think one out of pride, you want students that live here to go here and feel good about, just like those 3 students that I talked to at Caribou a short time ago. You want them to have that, those families to have that feeling about their experience. So part of it's out of pride, part of it's out of resources. as well, okay? And so we want to serve our students, and we want to do that as best we can. Going about setting a strategy to capture a higher percentage of eligible students, I've always believed that the mission is making the district, twofold, making the district strong as possible, that school as strong as possible, okay? Take care of your own ship, okay? We want Osseo area schools to be the best district in the state. That's the goal. That's the goal. I would want that for my daughter, okay? That's the goal. So take care of your own ship. So we're strengthening our own district, living out our strategic plan, strengthening our own district. And the second thing is we have to tell the story. You have to tell the story. And part of that is that's a big role of the superintendent, to tell the story, to be the face, one of the faces or the face of the district and tell the story. I think there's other things that go into that, branding of the district. And I think there's a lot of companies out there you can partner with to really help brand the district, to help us tell the story visually and in language, and then market that. So take care of your own ship, tell the story, brand it and market it, and develop that culture that this is where people want to be. And I think the staff has to live that. I think, you know, there's a quote that we are the stories we tell, and I think that's true. Okay, what is the story that staff are telling at the local coffee shop or in their neighborhood? Okay, what's the story that staff are telling? Okay, I want them to be that this is a great place to live and work. This is our district. I want them to tell the story as well.
All right. Thank you. And final question, is there anything else you would like for us to know about you as we consider your candidacy for the superintendent of Osseo area schools?
I think it's re-emphasizing some things. I mentioned my Minnesota roots. I got deep Minnesota roots, and I think deep roots in the Twin Cities metro area, and I view that as an asset. Understanding Minnesota and having connections with Minnesota Department of Education and other districts and colleagues, I view that as an asset to be invested here in the Twin Cities. I mentioned that the similarities in size and demographics and even some programmatic areas of the two districts, like my current district and Osseo area schools. I think also there's a serving multiple communities, as I mentioned earlier. I think there's some complexities with that, and I think I've got a strong, I guess, history and handle with that. So I would mention those as well. And the last thing I would say is I'm excited. I'm excited to be here, and I was excited. I mentioned for the third time talking to students at Caribou, and to see them light up, talk about Osseo schools, that motivates me. So I'm excited for this opportunity. I know it's got to be a fit, and it's got to be a partnership with the board and the community, but I'm confident in what I bring to the table, and the energy and passion I have around that, and I would love the opportunity to partner with you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
you.
Appreciate it.